All right. Good afternoon, everybody. You're in the Advance Your Business with Advanced Manufacturing from Acumatica. My name is Kevin Ruppert, and I'm assuming everybody can hear me. So anybody out there in the world that can hear me, say something. Stephen, you on the call? Can you hear me?
This is Brian. We can hear you.
All right, perfect. It's quite a tough crowd today, huh? All right, looks like Amy and Nicole also chimed in and said they can hear me. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Two primary focuses of today's session will be reviewing the outside process functionality within Acumatica Manufacturing, as well as the product configurator. Both of these are standard functions built into Acumatica, so we're going to do everything inside of Acumatica. Stephen Hennelly, who is one of my teammates here at Blytheco, is also on the call. He'll kind of proctor the chat. If you have any questions, certainly post them there. We'll stop after each of these sessions to answer any specific questions. And then at the very end, we're going to go ahead and have a bit of a Q&A session just in general terms of manufacturing, not necessarily specific to these two processes we're going through today. So I'm going to turn off my camera so you're not staring at the side of my head while I look at my other monitor, but I will start sharing my screen here and we'll start talking about outside processing. So as I mentioned, the first part of our session here will be focused on outside processing within Acumatica. So typically what I see with customers and potentially prospects are their outside process today is very disjoint. It's very segmented between production and purchasing. Purchasing doesn't really know what's going on with production, and production really doesn't know what's going on with purchasing. And it's just a very challenging situation to marry the two pieces of information. So within Acumatica, this is supported essentially starting all the way at the work center level, carried through to the bill of material, and then ultimately culminating inside of the production order and the production management. So what I've done here is I've set up a work center in Acumatica that is specific to a vendor. Doesn't necessarily have to be, but by making this specific to a vendor, it does make it a little bit easier to manage it, have better visibility, reporting, dashboarding, etc. But what you'll notice is I've earmarked this as an outside process work center. And then what that allows me to do is as I use that work center in a bill of material, a production order, it allows me to leverage that functionality. So I have a bill of material here for just a generic widget, if you will. And this particular bill of material does have an outside process work center assigned. Inside of that outside process work center, there's a particular service that I'm getting from an item, from the vendor, excuse me, a powder coating service. I've got some cost associated with it. And you'll notice on the outside process tab for this work center, I can designate the particular vendor and their location, which is consistent with standard Acumatica vendor management and profile functionality. And I also can earmark if this is a dropship process. We're going to assume that I'm going to send product to a vendor. They're going to do some value added services, and then they're going to return it. So I'm going to jump into my production order that I've created before this session started. And I use that same widget that I just built out, and I've added a quantity of 10 to produce. And if I look at my production order detail, you'll notice on that particular operation with the outside work center, it's noted here that this is an outside process and who the vendor is. If for some reason this particular vendor maybe didn't have capacity or I needed to make specific changes or use an alternative vendor, I could certainly still change the vendor here if I needed to. So I don't have to use the vendor that was assigned to the bill of material, nor the vendor that maybe that work center was designed for, designated for. So at this point, I'm ready to actually, process something, create, and execute against this production order, but I also need to issue the purchase order to the vendor. So I'm actually able to do that directly from the production order, or I can run mass process in Acumatica to generate those purchase orders in mass. So if I had 10 or 20 different production orders that maybe are going through the same outside process to the same outside process vendor, I certainly can do that from a mass process screen. For the sake of this demonstration, I'm just simply going to do it directly from the production order using some of the automation built into Acumatica. So you'll notice here on this operation, I can simply select create purchase order. And now what Acumatica is going to do is look at that particular outside process line. It's going to determine what items need to be purchased, who they need to be purchased from, and it's actually going to create that purchase order for me. It will open the purchase order screen at this point. I can review that. You'll notice it added that powder coating item that I needed to purchase. It put in the quantity associated with the purchase order, or excuse me, production order, and also pulled the cost associated with that item and or vendor combination. At this point, this purchase order is going to be managed like any other purchase order. I'm going to email it or print it out, send it off to my vendor. At some point, they're going to deliver product. I'm going to receive that purchase order, bill that purchase order, and all of those things that happen with a normal procurement process. The difference is as I do that, I'm going to have updates inside of the production order. So I'm actually going to open up my production order detail one more time, call up that particular production order, and you'll notice at this point, the line has been updated on the outside process to show the purchase order and the associated line. So now this is the PO that's associated with that. So now I'm going to go ahead and start a normal production process. And in this case, I'm going to release my production order. And I'm going to assume the first operation that has been done, in-house is going to be completed first. So I'm going to go ahead and do a move transaction. This is going to be standard Acumatica functionality from a production management perspective. You very well could be doing this with handhelds. You could be doing this manually from a move transaction screen. It's really up to you. In this case, I'm using a backflush option to backflush both my labor and my material. So I'm just simply going to create one move transaction and tell the system I'm indeed completing 10 pieces of this particular item against this operation. So I'll go ahead and release that transaction. In releasing that transaction, Acumatica is going to move this particular production order into the next operation. So now what's going to happen is this particular operation is going to show that it's ready to be moved to outside processing. So now what you'll notice is the first operation that I just finished is indeed marked completed. The second operation is released. When I look at my outside process tab, you'll notice that it tells me that I need to ship 10 of these to the vendor. I need to send this out to the vendor for outside processing. Now, again, as I did before, I can generate this transaction directly from this screen, or I can do it in mass. I'm going to go ahead and generate it directly from this screen. So I'm going to create a vendor shipment. What this is going to do is call up a transaction screen that allows me to designate the production order, the item, the quantity, as well as create both a pick list for my warehouse team so they know what they need to be preparing for shipment, as well as generating a pack list. So directly from here, I can generate a pick list and a packing list if I choose to do so. I'll go ahead and remove this transaction and confirm it. So now it assumes that I've shipped this to the outside process vendor. When I go back and look at my details, you'll notice that Acumatica has updated this particular line that I've shipped 10 of them, and all 10 of them remain at the vendor. So as we mentioned before, a lot of folks are saying, well, I don't know what's going on. Let me talk to purchasing, or purchasing doesn't know what's going on. Let me talk to production. Everybody knows exactly what's going on because these transactions are being tracked against that particular operation on that production order. So now the vendor has sent this stuff back, and I'm ready to actually receive my purchase order. So I would have already gone through and emailed this particular purchase order or sent it off to the vendor, and now I'm going to enter a PO receipt. When I enter the PO receipt, depending on my settings, whether this is a stock or a non-stock item, it may be accruing the cost. It may be putting items into inventory. I may create the AP bill. In this case, I'm just going to go ahead and receive this product in. So now that I've received this in, I'm going to now have the liability to pay my vendor at some point for the outside process that they performed. Now, at this point, I still don't have any cost and I still don't have any quantities completed because I need to also process on the production order that move or that completion transaction for that particular operation. So I'm going to go ahead and create the move transaction. One thing you'll note here is I'm only going to go ahead and do 5 of these. And the reason for that is I'm only going to acknowledge that the vendor sent 5 thus far. And I want to do that to show you how Acumatica is going to track that. So I'm going to go ahead and do a move operation for 5 of those. And now if I go look at my production order detail, you'll notice here that the system shows that we've completed 5 units. There's still 5 remaining at the vendor. So now again, good visibility to understand what is at my vendor and what has been returned from my vendor and what we shipped to the vendor. If I go look at my cost detail at this point, you'll notice that Acumatica is also recording in real time what the cost associated with different buckets may be. In this case, my subcontract, my planned cost is $14.50. Because I've only processed half of them, or 5 of the 10, my subcontract cost is at $7.25. So you'll notice I still have a variance here. And then if I wanted to finish this, I would continue with the operation or the production process. I would receive the additional 5 pieces. I would process a move for 5 more units. This operation would be completed. The outside process screen will be updated. And just to quickly show you that, I'll go ahead and finish out this particular move transaction. So now if I look at the production detail on this, since I've completed that second transaction, you'll notice that everything has come back from the vendor. All 10 have been completed and the operation has been completed. And now it's going to my internal operation of final assembly. So with Acumatica's Advanced Manufacturing, we can generate documentation for outside process, provide really nice visibility both to purchasing and production in respect to outside processing. So I'm going to stop here and let the group either post some questions in the chat, certainly use the audio to ask any questions you may have related to outside processing. All right, I'll give everybody just another second if they want to speak up or post something in the chat. Otherwise, we can we'll move on to product configurator. All right, going once, going twice, I'll move on to product configurator. So the product configurator inside of Acumatica is a rule-based configuration tool that really drives and facilitates a make-to-order environment. We also have an estimating module, which is more of an engineer-to-order, doesn't necessarily follow any rules or validation process like the product configurator does. The product configurator allows you to create as many different features and options as you want, create rules that interact with those. So in the event you select A in a certain option or attribute, then maybe you cannot select B in another area. So it's very much rule-based. In the rule-based process, it also allows different validations. So, minimum values, maximum values, number of selected items, quantities, things like that. So I often tell customers and prospects that if it's logical, we can probably do it with a product configurator, and we've done some really neat things with this. The other thing this has allowed us to do is get very dynamic in our product offering without having hundreds or thousands of SKUs maintained in your stock items. So you could take a single item that may allow you to create hundreds or thousands of different variations with a single stock item. So what happens is, inside of the configuration is where we build out these rules. And what I've done today is in response to the World Series, I thought using a baseball bat would be ideal. And really what's happening here is we're going to ask a number of questions about what the customer is trying to purchase, and then that's going to drive some of the rules. So I'm not going to get too in depth here. I'm going to show you on the sales order, but this is where we maintain all this information, right? And what happens is, as we're asking the questions and answering the questions, we're going to get into a position where it's going to drive what happens to the bill of materials. So this is referencing a certain bill of material. It's got a number of features and attributes or questions that I'm going to ask, and then this allows me to proceed with my my sales order and my production order. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start with a quote, and I created this quote and put the item on it, but I haven't yet run the configuration because I'm going to do that here with you guys. So what you'll notice is I've added that item to the sales order, or in this case, a quote. And you'll notice I have a configure button. So I'm going to go ahead and hit this configure button, and Acumatica is going to launch the product configurator. And now what this is going to do is walk me through a series of questions. And as I answer these questions, it's going to fill in some of the options over here. So the first thing is the bat length. I've got a default value here. I can certainly change this to any value I want. If I change this to something like 38, I've got a rule in here in which Acumatica is going to validate and say this must be between 30 and 35. So 38 is not a valid value. So I'll go ahead and put in 32. The next option here is what type of wood do I want to use? We offer ash or maple as the wood. So if I select ash, when I do that, you'll notice here on the left, the wood selection has updated to ash. I'm going to go in here now and select a handle color. I'm going to do natural, and then I want the the body of my bat to be red. Now, when I do this, you'll notice that all these different attributes and options are interacting with one another, but I still have to select the bat engraving. So I'm going to go ahead and select this particular option and click the options here. And you'll notice I can select from blue, black, gold, or silver. Now I'm going to hit the show all button to show you one other option here, and red shows up here as well. But this is not going to be allowed to be selected because Acumatica is validating that I can't use the same engraving color as the body. So it's going to automatically do an exclusion from there. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and select blue lettering. It will validate and accept that, and I'm going to hit finish here. When I do that, Acumatica is calculating the price, and it's also going to come up with a dynamic description back here on the sales order. So now when I close that particular configurator, you'll notice here the description is dynamic to what I've configured. So it knows this is an ash bat that's 32 inches in length with a natural handle and a red body. It's also populated the price. Because this is a make-to-order item, Acumatica has identified that I need to create a production order for this. And now directly from this particular screen, I can come in here and I can turn this into an order. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, create a quote, print the quote, email the quote, the customer accepts it. Well, one thing that may happen is, you know what, we've changed our mind. We don't want to have the red body. We want to change it to a blue body. So at any point in time, as long as this isn't in process, I can go back into the configuration. I can unfinish the configurator and change those attributes. So, I want to change this. We'll change it to black. It's going to update this. It'll update the body color over here. I refinish this. And now the description over here will be updated to include that it's now got a black body. So it's very dynamic. At this point, I'll go ahead and convert this into a standard sales order from my quote. And now this is a sales order. I'll go ahead and save the sales order. And now I'm going to create my production order. So directly from the sales order, I can create the production order. I also can run some automated process against this or do this in mass, like with most functions within Acumatica. I'll go ahead and create the production order directly from here. At that point in time, the production order is going to be linked to the sales order. So I'm going to access the production order from here. This will open up my production order that I just created. You'll notice on the references, it's linked directly back to that sales order, and it's also linked to the configuration that we just did. At this point, I could further modify the configuration if I needed to for whatever reason. I could delete the configuration and reconfigure it. But more importantly than that, what we've ultimately done is we've taken a bill of material that didn't really have any materials on it, and we've driven specific requirements based on our configuration. So you'll notice here, when I look at the cutting operation, it knows to use the ash wood. When I go into the painting and the staining operation, it knows to use natural for the handle and black for the body. When I get to the engraving, it's now updated with the blue paint for the engraving. So it's very dynamic both to the description, the pricing, but also what happens on the bill of materials. And now your normal production process will take over, whether you're using MRP to plan for materials, whether you're just doing going straight to production with this. All of those dynamic characteristics that have been inserted through the product configurator are now a part of that production order. So any questions on product configurator? All right, so at this point, we'll go ahead and open the floor for any general manufacturing questions. Both Stephen and I are happy to answer really any questions you may have, navigate around Acumatica, in respect to any of the manufacturing stuff, any questions or concerns. Certainly, if it applies to product configurator or outside processing, great, but any other questions around manufacturing are more than welcome as well. So Mike has asked, does Acumatica handle standard costing? Absolutely. So specific to manufacturing, if you're using standard costing, we obviously are going to drive the planned cost from the standard cost of the item and, of course, the standard cost of the components, if you will. When the production is completed and the item is moved to inventory, it's going to move to inventory at the standard specified cost. Any differences between that standard cost and the actual cost incurred to produce is going to move over to your WIP variance account. So we support many different costing methods, average, standard, FIFO, LIFO. Also support specific costing tier if you're doing lot serial traceability, things like that. And each of those costing methods will drive some different behavior from a costing hierarchy, but from a standard cost perspective, we support it both in our standard inventory management processes, but also specifically inside of manufacturing. Any other questions? All right, so Mike has a follow-up question. I import from Asia, so they're ocean freight and tariffs. Does Acumatica have a process to capture landed cost? Absolutely. So Acumatica does capture landed cost. Those landed cost entries are specifically tied to purchase receipts, and they also are tied to different landed cost types, different allocation methods of those landed cost types, and in turn are obviously adjusting the cost of your inventory. Because the way the landed cost entries are done, you can also be accruing those landed costs versus billing them as you enter them. And you have some different options on how you what your workflow looks like. But specifically, it's not just an estimate like I've seen in other systems. It's going to tie back specifically to a purchase receipt, the contents of that receipt, and as well as create an accrual or a liability to a specific vendor providing those services associated with that landed cost. And again, you can do allocations a number of ways, whether it be over weight, quantity, volume, things like that. Certainly cost. Any other questions? All right, so if I'll give everybody another minute or so to post any other questions or shout out some questions. Otherwise, I'll give you a couple minutes back in your day to prepare for any other sessions or go to the expo, chat with others. Certainly, I'll stick around for a couple more minutes if any other questions pop up or anybody wants to send me a private message. Feel free. All right, guys. Well, thank you for your time today. I hope you enjoyed the session and have a great time with the rest of the acuCONNECT 2021 conference. Take care, guys.